So Noella's Watch What Happens Live doozy of an appearance after this episode had audiences turning on her, and she also exposes some of those things that maybe aren't being truthfully told on the show. But also in this episode, before that Watch What Happens Live appearance, Jen and Ryne have a sloppy appearance at Heather's house, and more in this 11th episode of season 16 of Real Housewives of Orange County. Recap and react. If you are here live, make sure to say hello wherever you are joining from and whatever live chat is available to you. And we will jump right into this recap and react, starting with us seeing Heather being driven by Max and parallel parking by the beach, which is a nightmare for anyone, but she was in a Porsche and had a camera crew with her. So that was probably very pressure filled. But Shannon is now with Stella and Adeline and John, talking chores and allowances, similar to the last episode with Sophie via FaceTime. And now we are with Emily, who is emotional seeing her daughter talk to her stepsister via FaceTime about the feeling of being baptized, where the sister says, "Oh, you'll feel very peaceful and happy." And Emily is saying she hopes Annabelle, the daughter who's being baptized, becomes just as happy as her stepdaughter is when she grows up. Now, Emily then opens up more about her dad leaving her after her parents divorced growing up, and she just said she wants to give her kids a better life, which is what she shared earlier this season with us. And then Shane assures her that she is doing that and she is giving her kids a better life than she had. And then Emily thanks Shane for being such a great dad, where Shane then says Emily maybe might not know the whole story between her parents, which is why maybe it doesn't seem to make sense when she said she goes home to visit her dad and he seems like a really cool guy. And he kind of assures her that we can't always have what we wish for. But then Shane ends this by making a funny comment about him being a one woman man, and he does not need a stack of vaginas to be happy, which is kind of a dig at Noella and James. But quickly, reaction to the scene was, besides that funny comment by Shane about the stack of vaginas, I still think it is fascinating to be watching both Orange County and Salt Lake City franchises of this series take on the Mormon church and the Mormon religion, OC making it seem like more of a glamorous, happy version, and Salt Lake City portraying it more of as a miserable cult-like environment and religion. So I think that's just still very interesting to see that play out. But let's keep going to Shannon, who is meeting with Heather and Heather's friend Tawnie from Cabo, who we saw was there, along with Jen, where everyone is having trouble walking on the boardwalk planks with their heels going up to the restaurant. But we quickly learn that this is 2 weeks after that last scene we saw last episode, where Jen was sharing with Emily and Shannon about her troubles with Ryne after sharing with the entire group about it. Now, Jen then opens up about the continued stress of the relationship and haven't had that talk with Ryne yet, because she wants to do it in front of a professional and in a professional setting, saying that she felt humiliated by the situation that we saw on camera last time, or a couple times ago, where he walked out, and shares that that morning at this current scene, she got an email that saying that the mortgage of their house hadn't been paid for some reason, and that turned into a big fight between them, instead of what she wanted was just basically saying, I'll get it handled and resolve the situation. Now, Shannon, Jen, and Heather are now explaining how they try to communicate with their men in terms that they can understand. Shannon says she used to write letters to David to kind of explain in that way, because sometimes when they're talking to their husbands, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other, and you don't really know what's sticking. Jen then says she tried to use a basketball analogy for Ryne, and Heather then says she tried to change the narrative by kind of agreeing to some of the little things and not getting so wrapped up in the small things she was annoyed by. But they all then agree that men are hard to communicate with. And we saw an example of this in a flashback to the onion rings of Heather's party one year, where she was saying, "You're being stupid, Terry, for wanting onion rings," but then she ended up just giving him the onion rings. Probably not the example Heather was thinking of when she was talking about this on camera, but it was kind of a stretch in relation to this to kind of give us a throwback to earlier Heather scenes. But now Heather then invites Jen and Ryne over to a dinner party of other couples of Heather's that she knows that are been married a long time and doing really well. So Jen and Ryne can be around couples that are still together after all these years. Then we finally end the scene with Tawnie suggesting everyone read a book titled Men Are Waffles, Women Are Spaghetti. And we get another humorous end to the scene from that. But I just want to say I like this whole scene and seeing Tawnie with the group, even the few comments from her which were humorous and also empathetic to Jen. Maybe a new friend of the show, maybe a new housewife next season. Who knows? We'll see. But it also gets, the scene kind of gets ruined for me when I realize, same with last episode and what's going to happen later in this episode, Heather has a marriage advice show now out on E with Terry, and her invite to Jen and Ryne to come over seems like kind of a brag and a way to kind of say, oh, my friends are have good marriages and have gotten through all this and they're so great. And later we'll see how that kind of turns out, and it's probably not the best choice by Jen to take that offer up. But now we are with Noella, who is with her friend Kenny, talking about mediation, how that went. And it happened to be at a building near the airport earlier that day, where Noella says James was the one who pushed to do the mediation in person, but he didn't end up showing up in person, except he opted to show up over FaceTime. But she said she could see his Gulfstream. That's how close they were, where it would park at the airport. That's how close the building was to the airport. But she didn't answer Kenny's question of if it was his Gulfstream that was there. She says they only talked about money, not the details about the life insurance or names of things or items or kids' education funds, whatever it is. Where Noella says the silence of James was the most disturbing part of the whole situation. And Noella says she now needs to find closure on her own since James isn't going to give her anything in that regards. So let's react to the scene. So this mediation recap from Noella was confusing to me because she says she didn't want to see James, but was unhappy he only showed up via FaceTime and he didn't speak. So if you weren't going to see him anyway, why care if he shows up? At least he appeared in some form and upheld his end of the deal. And on her saying they discussed money but not the things, to me it's kind of the same difference because, and this also proves that kind of Noella is more focused on the material things than anything else. But I do wonder what she meant by that as far as differentiating the money from the physical items. Also, the Gulfstream comment was weird, and her friend picked up on that for sure. So I don't know what she meant by that. If she meant to say that's where his Gulfstream used to park, and so that's how close I was. I remember going there all the time. It's just anything, all this confusing parts of Noella's divorce saga. But anyways, let's keep going. Let me check the chat really quick. It looks like everything is good. So now Heather is with Gina at her townhome visiting for the first time, where she brings over some clothes for her to try on, for her to wear for her new business launch, since Heather says she can relate and Gina's on an upswing in her life and I want to help her look fresh and cool for her new business launch because she's been at Heather's launch businesses before as well. But amid Heather asking for a tour of the home, Gina is up front and acknowledging the obvious that her townhome tour will not include a champagne button in her closet and will be much shorter. And Heather, unlike Shannon, doesn't seem to care and is very complimentary, besides joking about something possibly living in her walls and being surprised 6 kids keep the shared space so clean. Either that's a dig at her own kids or shows how she initially thought of Gina's kids as a little lower on the scale than her. I don't know. But as Heather is going through items from Gina's closet, Gina is explaining why all the tags are still on some of these clothes, saying she doesn't have any places to go to wear these, but she still likes to shop. And Heather is having to help Gina part with some items from her younger years and memories. And I can imagine this is a common thing, although I can't personally relate to that. But I do enjoy the humorous banter between these two because they somehow have a lot in common, even though on the surface they seem kind of far apart in lifestyle experience or lifestyle places in their life, whatever. But this is where Heather shines to me. But anyways, Gina brings out her wedding dress and is emotional because it brings up and it symbolizes her past life and her wedding day future thoughts that didn't end up being what she thought they would be, but is going to give it to someone who can use the dress for something and turn her sadness into a positive. Quick reaction on this scene. I'm curious to see how long this Heather supporting Gina's new skincare line lasts. That's all I'm saying. Or at least how it will pan out. For now, it looks genuine, and I think seeing this side of Heather and Gina is good. So we'll leave it there for now. But let's keep going to Shane's parents' house for the baptism after party, where we learned some more details about the baptism, which was not filmed itself, which we learned Shane was actually the one that got to baptize his daughter, or bless his daughter. And it was only the second time Emily had ever seen Shane cry in their whole time together. She calls him a good man for the second time this episode, and he tries fixing her dress, leading to them agreeing her boobs are just two different sizes and maybe they should fix them. But Emily then reminds us of something I actually forgot. I feel like she shared this before, that her sister was actually the surrogate for Annabelle. So it was clearly very, very emotional for her sister as well. But as Annabelle is taking photos with her dress and looking all happy and pure, Gina and Emily are catching up since they are the only two cast members this season that were at the baptism. But we did get to see former RHOC, Real Housewife of Orange County, Lizzie. She was there because she's friends with Emily. But Emily tells Gina she told Shannon about Gina saying she thought Shannon was jealous of her relationship with Heather. And Gina says she was aware there was a chance it would get back to Shannon because she told Emily, and she knows she talks to Shannon. And she said she actually wasn't exactly mad about it and she wasn't even mad that she took that shot at Shannon because she kind of wanted it to get back to her. But Emily says Shannon told her Gina talks about herself too much. And Gina then says that is very ripe coming from Shannon, considering Shannon talks about herself a lot. And the scene ends by Gina's basically saying she's pissed off hearing that from Shannon. And we will have to watch what happens to see how this plays out in the coming weeks. The quick reaction to this scene. Nice to see the happiness of Emily and her family in this situation. But I agree with Gina and Emily that Shannon is projecting pretty majorly on Gina and everyone really in the group. And I'll be curious to see what happens next time they're all together, because right now, since Shannon's lunch we saw last episode, they are all saying these things behind each other's backs, but they're all kind of telling each other too. So no one's really confronted each other face to face. So I'm curious to see what happens when they all get together. But we are now quickly speaking of Shannon, with Shannon and John on date night at the infamous booth at the Quiet Woman, which we've seen make an appearance this season already. But they start by commenting on their passion for one another that they thought they could never have or never thought was possible. And this came up because Shannon was discussing her hormone levels and energy that's going on. And John was like, well, I guess your libido isn't a problem because of me, blah, blah, blah. But then Shannon gets into what happened at the lunch she hosted with all the girls last episode and brought up the whole conversation around Gina's skincare line. And Shannon says they have discussed this, unlike Noella, who was kind of clueless about this. But she says the fallout in the last episode, where Emily told her what Gina said, Shannon seems to think Gina is coming from an arrogant place by asking about the skincare line or talking about Shannon's lack of close friends. John says he thinks Gina is looking for reasons to make Shannon look bad. Then Shannon comments on Gina pointing out her small group of friends, and John is defending Shannon on this, where John ends by asking, who does Gina think she is? So clearly the battle lines are being drawn and the men are getting involved now, which I always think adds another layer of intrigue in these situations in any of these franchises. So I'm happy to see the men sharing their opinion and not being afraid to do so. All right, let's see what's going on. Let me take a quick sip of water before we get into the last and most dramatic part of this episode. All right. So we are now with Terry and Heather, who are preparing for the couple's dinner party with Jen and Ryne and others. Terry is being Terry by being kind of a dorky, playful person, and Heather is being Heather by correcting last-minute things as she does. And they then have a powwow about Ryan's name and how to pronounce it, where Heather says it's pronounced like Ryne, like the Rhine River, even though it's not spelled the same. But anyways, Heather then cuts the label off Terry's suit jacket, and Heather shuts down Terry's funny joke trying to claim wearing tags means you are still and are successful. So Jen and Ryne then are on their way to arrive first before everyone else after Jen says she didn't tell Ryne too much about the situation because he might not have agreed to come if she had filled him in all the way. Not sure if that was the best call at this point, but we'll see more and maybe hear from Ryne at the reunion. But they kind of awkwardly, mostly on Ryan's part, arrive with Ryne being nervous to even enter the home. And then we learn that Ryne doesn't even or hasn't ever had a sip of alcohol, which is prompted, of course, by Terry doing another thing like he did to Shane when he first met Shane a couple weeks ago, where he kind of grills him on, have you tried anything else? Like, that's kind of weird that you don't drink. But the uncomfortable air continues as they sit for cocktails before everyone arrives, where Ryne acknowledges that it's a big deal for him to be even wearing socks and shoes, which is a good start. But then Jen and Heather split from Terry and Ryne, and the boys go downstairs and continue talking, where we learn Ryne, his vice is that he gambles, since he shares that he was actually a pro gambler before they had kids. And Terry is trying to pull out more information from Jen and Terry, and kind of compares his situation of being a doctor to Ryne being married to a doctor, where Ryne suggests Terry repeat his stance of Jen marrying the perfect person to Jen because it might help him out a little bit. So now, the two other couples arrive, the friend couples, and we get a notable, but I think slightly taken out of context, reaction from one friend of Heather's to Ryan's name pronunciation of an oh, kind of a laugh puff reenactment here. I'm trying to do, but which is, I think it was all of us probably, but she was more vocal about it. But Heather emphasized that family, fun, and communication were the common threads of these married couples. So now, we see Jen is pointing out what we are seeing as an aloof Ryne in this social situation, which she says comes off as rude and kind of arrogant to some people and kind of him being an asshole, but it's just him kind of being nervous and shy. Jen is already drunk at this point and is kind of nitpicking Ryne, whether it be the angle of his seating away from her, or then the napkin he's being used as a bib, which Heather kind of imitates humorously in her confessional. But Heather is then noticing in her confessional that the more Jen opens up and drinks, the more introverted Ryne becomes, and she says this is not looking good. But then Jen leads the toast and toasts humorously to women's underwear because it may not be the best thing in the world, but it's the closest to it. And everyone was kind of like staring at each other at first, which clearly was edited, but they all laughed after that. But now we then get a montage of all the food that they're eating and some sound bites of the other couple's stories, followed by the marriage talk of getting through tough times because it is worth it. But then, after some humorous stories of surviving marriage and some funny marriage advice they've gotten over the years, we get the drunken version of the story we already kind of heard of how Jen met Ryne and how Ryne proposed to Jen to keep Jen in town even after they had kids instead of going to work at Harvard. Now, Ryne is still very closed off at this point and declined to share his version of that story with the group because he is clearly uncomfortable with this, and his wife is continuing to interject drunkenly. After some awkward kisses and touching between Ryne and Jen, and some more drunk rambling by Jen, and a walk away from the table by Ryne as he kind of asks Jen to stop drinking, we get an end to the evening of drunk Jen, with her leaving with a nail in the coffin from Ryne of him patting her on the back as she heads out the door, which is a big old yikes and kind of like a friendly pat, which is just not a good look for a married couple. But in the car, Ryne suggests that she kind of lays down, or she suggests to lay down. He suggests maybe you should go to sleep, kind of shut her up. And then he just talks to the driver apparently the rest of the way home. But we end this with Terry being Terry and Heather having to reel him in, talking about Jen and Ryne to their friends after they left. And they all say that they were really nice, but but kind of a mess, which Heather didn't like Terry saying that. All right, we're going to react to this last scene, and then we'll get to the Noella Watch What Happens Live appearance after that. But this seemed like a real scene from Heather and Terry, although there is still that underlying agenda with the marriage advice of their show, which Heather slightly confirmed and mentioned in the after show on Bravo's YouTube channel and their website, which was a shocker, that kind of, but not really. Heather said it was coincidental that Jen was having marital troubles as they were filming this other show during filming of this show. But I can bet Heather kind of, and I kind of believe that it was a coincidence a little bit, but maybe, actually I really think that Heather in the back of her mind was probably thinking, yes, let's lean into this because this will give me a reason to talk about this later. Also, it does make sense though what she said earlier about if you want to be more like something, be around it more. So that I agree with. And also, I partly believe Heather did this because she was kind of setting up, or I believe she was kind of setting up Jen to look a little bit stupid by over-serving her under the guise of helping her out for good TV and kind of a self-producing moment, which will come up in the video I'm doing over the interview she just did, which exposed a lot of herself a lot. So we'll stay tuned for that. But I also relate to Ryne in this social setting a little bit and kind of not feeling 100% comfortable, but I personally save my outgoingness for when I need to in situations like this, and I can pretend I'm comfortable, which usually leads to real comfort. But I also am like Ryne, reserved at first, but then once I get to know people, I open up a little more. But I think they kind of edited this scene, some of this scene, to make it look worse or more awkward than it was, because I saw a few instances of Ryne opening up and being a little more comfortable. And I think the way this was set up at the table with the square table with everyone on a different side, it was probably easy to edit this and chop it up, make it what they want. But I can also tell though that he and Jen were not acting and they were being their true selves, and everyone's reactions probably were genuine. They just were kind of chopped up and put in different places. But I will say one thing: I am not as extreme of an introvert in social situations as Ryne, and especially in smaller groups. I think in bigger groups where I usually find a smaller group to get along with and kind of stick with them. But anyways, let's go now to Noella's Watch What Happens Live appearance. So the audience seemed to be voting against Noella in every live poll that came out on the show, because it was a landslide in saying that Noella did talk about herself too much. And also, she was voted the most in need of a makeover from the cast by the audience. And Andy kind of seemed to pick up on this, what I saw, this unfavorable reaction to Noella in the vote, and quickly kind of moved on. And she was a little shocked about it, but I'm not sure if he was surprised, or maybe he wasn't happy about it, because it is one thing to have a cast member be hated in some ways, but it looks like Noella is kind of universally panned at this point by the audience, which can be a disaster for the show. Now, Noella also said in this interview that she had a hard time investing in Jen's relationship because she doesn't think Jen is even invested in her relationship. But Noella then declined, saying 3 nice things about Heather Dubrow and called her a vile human being. So I guess there's no love lost there, and it's going to come out at the reunion too. Yikes. But then Noella said Nicole didn't actually drop the lawsuit like it was claimed on the show against Terry, and it appears to be kind of a narrative about the dropping of the lawsuit between the Dubrows and Nicole wanting this to go away on the show. But and this also had Andy quickly moving on from this, and I wonder if either he's trying to cover for the Dubrows or he wants to save this and bring it up again at the reunion. And maybe we'll get a surprise appearance from Nicole at the reunion to defend herself and expose the truth about the situation, hopefully in front of both Terry and Heather Dubrow at the reunion. So I'm curious to see if that comes up. I hope it does. But she then responded to Tamara calling her a village idiot by saying, well, it's kind of cool to be called the village idiot by one of the most iconic, well-known village idiots. Yikes. And then finally, Noella says that the reason she actually double dated with Vicky and Steve, so that kind of explains why she was at the engagement party a few seasons back, which we touched on at the beginning of this season when we were talking about the new cast members. So let me know what you thought of this whole episode and Noella's appearance and Watch What Happens Live, whether you comment here live or on the replay in any comment section that's available. Let me know what you thought. And make sure to go back to last episode last week because we just did that recap and react, so we're all caught up on all of these. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode and this recap and react. Make sure to do whatever you got to do to show some love for this episode, whether it's a like or an upvote, thumbs up, or a rating. And make sure to do what you got to do to make sure you don't miss another episode by subscribing or liking or adding or following, whatever it's called, wherever you are tuning in from. And I will talk to you in the next one. Bye-bye.